Hey guys, how is it going? Today we're going to talk about ancient Egypt. Here's a music video here for those. Normally I play this, when students are coming into class. It's the 80s hits by the Bangles, Walk Like an Egyptian. So if you go, I'm going to put the link in Google Classroom, so if you're interested, you'll be able to access it. All right, here we go. So here's a map of Egypt. And some let's see. Remember, this is Upper Egypt. This is Lower Egypt because the water flows this way into the Nile Delta, into the Mediterranean Sea. We will talk about the pyramids of Giza. Of course, you have the Sphinx right here. Another important place would be Karnak. They did a lot of excavation there. Luxor is another a big place. All this stuff is kind of cool. But we're going to talk about specifically some of these things. All right, so it's located on the continent of Africa. Most of you already know that. Its borders on the east, south, and west are deserts. Okay, so here's the western, eastern desert. It's kind of surrounded by desert. By the north, we have the Mediterranean Sea. The Nile River is 600 miles, right? Flowed into the Nile Delta. This span right here, this width here, is about 125 miles across. Okay, so let's go here. Oh, wait a minute. Why is this? No. Okay, it's this one.
Right. If you're like a lot of people who live far away from Egypt, you may picture this land as a sea of undulating sand dunes, punctuated by pyramids that sit essentially in the middle of nowhere. But this really isn't representative of what Egypt looks like either today or in ancient times. And the country actually varies a lot from one place to another in terms of the geography. So, what was it like where ancient Egyptians actually lived? Well, stay tuned because that's what we'll be talking about in this video today. Welcome to the Dead Speak Online, where we demystify the words and lives of the ancient Egyptians through animated videos like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing. When we look at a map of modern Egypt, it's true that most of it is dry desert. And while the borders in ancient times were actually quite similar to the modern ones, most people actually lived near the Nile or near an oasis, not out in the middle of the desert. And this remains mostly true today in modern Egypt as well. Today in this video, I'll be talking about the places where most ancient Egyptians lived. That is the Nile Valley and the Nile Delta. And in other videos, I'll talk about other parts of the country. So check the description below for links to those videos. So what was it like to live by the Nile during pharaonic times? Well, in a word, wet. Not only did the Nile provide the water for most people's daily needs in ancient Egypt, but it also provided the water and fertilizer needed for growing food in ancient Egypt, and it did this by flooding its banks every year during the summer. This annual flood was brought on by heavy rains around the origin of the Nile, especially in what is now Ethiopia. The floodwaters, when they finally receded, left behind a rich black topsoil, as well as basins of trapped water, both of which were wonderful for growing a variety of crops, but especially grains like wheat and barley. This black mud that was left behind by the flood also was used for everyday items, such as making pottery and also making bricks for building houses. Of course, people need water to survive, so living near the Nile or another source of water is a necessity. But it wasn't all about having water to drink. Since the vast majority of people in ancient Egypt worked on farms, they also lived very close to the farmland that was continually soaked either by the annual flood or by artificial irrigation. Farming in the Nile were so central to the ancient Egyptians' way of life that their calendar revolved around them. The year was divided into 3 seasons: the flood season, the growing season, and the harvest or drought season. Now, because farming was so central to the ancient Egyptian way of life, They had to maintain a careful balance between living close to these resources, close to their farms, but not so close to the Nile that they ran a risk of having their houses washed away during the annual flood. They also didn't want to take up valuable farmland with their houses, so they usually lived right along the edge of the farms. Thus, contrary to the sort of popular idea of a culture in the middle of the desert, the ancient Egyptians actually lived really close to the water and oftentimes in rather damp conditions along the edges of their farms. The environment of Egypt also provided some great natural boundaries from its neighbors. So, to the north, for example, around the mouth of the Nile Delta, or rather mouths, where it spills into the Mediterranean, it's rather difficult to navigate by boat. To the northeast, we have the Sinai Peninsula, which is covered with desert, making it difficult to travel between Egypt and Egypt's northeastern neighbors in what we now call the Near East. To the south, the Nile is broken up by a series of what we call cataracts, which are basically big outcroppings of rock that create huge rapids that are nearly impossible to navigate with a boat. And the first cataract sits around where the ancient border of Egypt was to the south, around what we call modern Aswan. In addition, to the east and west of the Nile Valley, we have the eastern and western deserts that were quite difficult to traverse. Thus, these natural elements made Egypt difficult to invade and helped sustain a somewhat stable political situation for Egypt for thousands of years. So while the stereotypical image of Egypt is one of undulating sand dunes, the reality is that most people did not live in the desert, and instead these deserts acted as a natural barrier for the country. For most ancient Egyptians who lived along the Nile Valley or in the Nile Delta, life was instead actually pretty damp, and even sometimes quite muddy. If you're interested in learning more about ancient Egypt, make sure to check out my other videos and take a look at the links.
All right, let's see where we're at here. Okay. Bum, bum, bum. All right, so the Egyptian Empire. The settlement begins around 7,000 years ago. The land at the time is called Semet, which just means black lands. Now, from the video we just watched, you learn that when the Nile River floods, it leaves behind a black sediment, right, that seeps into the ground and kind of creates this blackish color. That's why they call it that, okay? It consists of two large kingdoms, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. There's going to be times of peace and prosperity, and then there's times it's truncated by destruction and chaos, okay? All right, so here's how we break up, I guess, Egyptian history, if you will. We have the Old Kingdom, 2575 to 2134 BCE, that goes into the Middle Kingdom. You see the years here, and then the New Kingdom that ends in 1070. Okay, so in the Old Kingdom, we have pharaohs there, and that's their word for, I guess, leader, right? Men and women. So if a woman's in charge, she's called a pharaoh. There's not a female version of that or a male version of that. It's just one title. That's kind of interesting and unique to the Egyptians. But they have strong central states or governments. They're absolute rulers, and they're considered gods, right? So very, very powerful. The Egyptians will build the pyramids of Giza, and actually it's going to be this dude Khufu that does this. And we're going to watch a video about the pyramids of Giza, but he's going to be the guy that actually starts this fad of building pyramids, okay? There's going to be power struggles, crop failures. The cost of the pyramids contributed to the collapse of the Old Kingdom because it's just so expensive, so time-consuming. And remember, other empires are rising up, so we're seeing competition. In the Middle Kingdom, we have large drainage projects, canals, levees, dikes, these sorts of things to create more farmland. Trade had contacted with the Middle East and Crete, and we already know that they do a lot of business with the Mesopotamians, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians. But we're going to see a lot of corruption during this time and a lot of rebellions. So not necessarily civil wars, but we're going to start seeing pockets of them, of individuals and groups rising up. Okay. During this time, King Mentuhotep, he's here, right? He's going to unite. So Egypt's going to split apart. He's going to unite them, and he moves the capital from Memphis to Thebes. Okay, and then the New Kingdom, we have powerful pharaohs once again, large empires that reach across to the Euphrates River. Right, Euphrates River is in Mesopotamia. Right, so by then that empire has expanded all the way into modern day Iraq. Okay, Hatshepsut, this is a female. We're going to watch a video about her in just a minute. Very cool lady. She's going to be encouraging trade and doing a lot of stuff for the Egyptians. And then Ramses II, he's very common. You see him a lot in reference in literature and films. He will expand the Egyptian rule all the way to Syria. So he's going to continue to expand the empire. And then, of course, after Ramses II, we're going to see that the Egyptian power declines. All right, ancient Egyptian society. So here's another social hierarchy, and I wish I was trying to get a clearer picture, but I like that it explains things here. Okay, so at the top, we have the pharaoh, and I said rich people, poor people. Okay, we already said, he's the king of Egypt. He's considered a god on earth. Then you have the government officials. They're going to be help running the government, building infrastructures, collecting taxes, these sorts of things. And then we're going to have soldiers, right? They're going to be protecting the empire and fighting outsiders. Scribes are people that record and write stuff down. These are educated people, okay? Merchants, it's kind of like the business people. These are the people that buy and sell products. Okay, craftsmen, they make stuff. Peasants, these are farmers, construction workers. It's going to be these guys that build the pyramid. The misconception is that slaves do it, but for most of Egyptian history, it's the peasants that do it, okay? Slaves are considered prisoners of war. They're house servants. They're there to obey, okay? So here it says, yeah, slaves do not build the pyramids. All right, here we go. Daily life. We're going to watch these two videos. Their economy is solely based, on agriculture and trade. So let's go to this. Ancient life in Egypt. Bum, 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 bum. Here we go.
Did you know that in ancient Egypt there was no official marriage ceremony? So how did people marry? How did they find a mate? And what was family life like? Did adult ancient Egyptians live with their parents? Stay tuned because that's what we'll be talking about today. Welcome to the Dead Speak Online, where we demystify the words and lives of the ancient Egyptians through animated videos like this one. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It may be a surprise to learn that in ancient Egypt, marriage was not a matter of either government or religious regulation, but rather an arrangement between two individuals and their families. The reason for this lack of religious and state involvement appears to be because marriage was really largely used for property reasons rather than for moral reasons. Getting married is referred to in ancient Egyptian by the euphemisms many to more and gerig pair to found a house, supporting the idea that marriage was largely about having a shared dwelling, a shared place to live, and shared marital property. Also, marriage was not needed for moral reasons because in ancient Egypt it was not taboo to have relationships outside of marriage, so long as neither party was actually married to somebody else. Also, while divorce was certainly not an ideal situation for a couple, it was not uncommon in ancient Egypt, and it was certainly not considered a disgrace. And we have records of lots of men and women who actually remarried after getting divorced. While art often shows a couple with only 2 children, having many more children was likely quite common. And this is supported by documentation such as census records, legal documents, and even tomb paintings. The New Kingdom text called the Instruction of Ani actually advises a man to marry young and have many children, saying, quote, "Happy the man whose people are many, he is saluted on account of his progeny." End quote. In addition, while married couples might live together in their own house with just their own children, it was also common to live with a lot of other family members, which might include parents, siblings, and aunts. For example, a 13th dynasty census record from the site of Lahun features the family of a man named Hori. And initially we have a record that shows Hori lived alone with just his wife, Shepset, and his son, Sneferu. But a later record for the same household shows an addition of 6 other women, including his mother and also his sisters and nieces. In ancient Egypt, children were expected to take care of their parents during their old age, which is probably part of why Hori had his mother move in with him. In exchange, children would inherit from both of their parents, both male and female children, unlike a lot of other cultures. And this inheritance might include such things as houses, farms, and everyday items like dishes. The child who did the most to take care of his parents and who was responsible for their burial usually received the largest share of inheritance, whether it was a son or a daughter. In some cases, though, it could even be another family member, such as a brother or even a friend or business associate. How important it was for ancient Egyptians to take care of their parents in old age is driven home in a New Kingdom legal document that was drawn up for a woman named Naunacht. In this document, Naunacht describes how out of her 8 children, only some of them helped take care of her, and those who didn't help take care of her, she disinherited. However, the document also specifies that the children could still inherit from their father, even though Naunacht had disinherited some of them. Thus, in addition to highlighting the importance of care for elderly parents, this document also shows how women could own property and even when married, retain the right to do as they pleased with their own property that they had brought into the marriage. In Naunacht's case, she had inherited property from her first husband when he died, and this property remained solely under her control even when she married her second husband, who then fathered her 8 children. While much about ancient Egyptians' daily life and social customs, such as marriage, are quite different from our modern Western ones today, there's also much about ancient Egyptian family life that may feel familiar, whether it's taking care of family members or arguing with them about money. If you're interested in seeing a whole video on any of the aspects of Egyptian family life that I touched,
all right, here we go. Oh, okay. A day in the life of an Egyptian doctor. This is pretty cool. All right, so it says, for a delightful remedy against death, take half an onion and the froth of a beer. What? I mean, I don't know if it's going to prevent you from dying, but you're probably going to stink. So here we go.
It's another sweltering morning in Memphis, Egypt. As the sunlight brightens the Nile, Pesachet checks her supplies: honey, garlic, cumin, acacia leaves, cedar oil. She's well stocked with the essentials she needs to treat her patients. Pesachet is a Sunu, or a doctor. In order to become one, she had to train as a scribe and study the medical papyri stored at the Per Ankh, the House of Life. Now she teaches her own students there. Before teaching, Pesachet has a patient to see. One of the workers at the temple construction site has injured his arm. When Pesachet arrives, the laborer's arm is clearly broken. And worse, the fracture is a sed with multiple bone fragments. Pesachet binds and immobilizes the injury. Her next stop is the House of Life. On her way, a woman intercepts Pesachet in the street. The woman's son has been stung by a scorpion. Pesachet has seen many similar stings and knows exactly what to do. She must say an incantation to cast the poison out. She begins to recite the spell, invoking Serket, patron of physicians and goddess of venomous creatures. Pesachet recites the spell as if she is Serket. This commanding approach has the greatest chance at success. After she utters the last line, she tries to cut the poison out with a knife, for good measure. Pesachet packs up to leave, but the woman has another question. She wants to find out if she's pregnant. Pesachet explains her fail-safe pregnancy test. Plant 2 seeds, 1 barley, 1 emmer. Then urinate on the seeds every day. If the plants grow, she's pregnant. A barley seedling predicts a baby boy, while emmer foretells a girl. Pesachet also recommends a prayer to Hathor, goddess of fertility. When Pesachet finally arrives at the House of Life, she runs into the doctor priest Isesi. She greets Isesi politely, but she thinks priests are very full of themselves. She doesn't envy Isesi's role as Nero Pehut, which directly translates to herdsman of the anus to the royal family, or guardian of the royal anus. Inside, the House of Life is bustling as usual with scribes, priests, doctors, and students. Papyri containing all kinds of records, not just medical information, are stored here. Pesachet's son, Akhet-Hetep, is hard at work copying documents as part of his training to become a scribe. He's a particularly promising student, but he was admitted to study because Pesachet is a scribe, as was her father before her. Without family in the profession, it's very difficult for boys and impossible for girls to pursue this education. Pesachet oversees all the female Sunus and Sunus in training in Memphis. The men have their own overseer, as the male doctors won't answer to a woman. Today, Pesachet teaches anatomy. She quizzes her students on the metu, the body's vessels that transport blood, air, urine, and even bad spirits. Pesachet is preparing to leave when a pale, thin woman accosts her at the door and begs to be examined. The woman has a huge, sore lump under her arm. Pesachet probes the growth and finds it cool to the touch and hard like an unripe hemat fruit. She has read about ailments like this, but never seen one. For this tumor, there is no treatment, medicine, or spell. All the texts give the same advice: do nothing. After delivering the bad news, Pesachet goes outside. She lingers on the steps of the House of Life, admiring the city at dusk. In spite of all her hard work, there will always be patients she can't help, like the woman with the tumor. They linger with her, but Pesachet has no time to dwell. In a few short weeks, the Nile's annual flooding will begin, bringing life to the soil for the next year's harvest and a whole new crop of patients. Keep exploring the details of daily life in ancient civilizations with our Day in the Life playlist.
All right. Here we go. Let's see where we're at now. Okay. All right. So Egyptian pharaohs. It's kind of cool. It's like a 5th grade project or something, right? All right. So let's go here. Egyptian pharaohs.
As you probably know, the ancient
Yes.
Egyptian civilization thrived around the Nile River Valley. Because of this river valley, agriculture boomed and population grew. Eventually, leaders emerged and took control of the entire civilization. We're going to take a closer look at a few of these rulers that controlled ancient Egypt during the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. During these 3 periods of stability and unity, the ancient Egyptian leaders, known as pharaohs, had many great accomplishments. During the Old Kingdom, pharaohs set up a central government and built great tombs for themselves. In the Middle Kingdom, great achievements in literature, art, and architecture were made. The New Kingdom, also known as Egypt's Golden Age, was a time of stability and peace. During all 3 periods, pharaohs held supreme power. They were the kings, military generals, and religious leaders of the land. They were in charge of everything. Pharaoh Khufu ruled from 2551 to 2528 BCE. He is responsible for the Great Pyramid at Giza. Not too much is known about Pharaoh Khufu. There are contradictory stories about his reign. It is generally accepted that Khufu helped establish the pharaoh as the person in charge in ancient Egypt. Much like pharaohs that followed him, Khufu declared himself a god. Khufu was responsible for building the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the wonders of the world. The Great Pyramid would be Khufu's final resting place, as his soul entered the afterlife. It took more than 2 million stone blocks and more than 20 years to complete. Pharaoh Senusret I ruled from 1971 to 1926 BCE. Art, literature, and architecture flourished during his reign. Since the pharaoh controlled gold, copper, and gem mines, craftspeople thrived with abundant resources. Jewelry was made with these precious metals and gems. Senusret also built and improved many temples, shrines, and religious monuments across the Egyptian civilization. The White Chapel is a prime example of his religious architectural achievements. The craftsmanship is evident in the detailed carvings all throughout the temple. Unfortunately, a later pharaoh took the White Chapel apart to use in his own monument. Archaeologists discovered the pieces of the White Chapel and reconstructed it. Pharaoh Hatshepsut ruled from 1473 to 1458 BCE. She was Egypt's first female ruler, and she demanded the same respect as a male ruler. As pharaoh, she promoted trade with other countries. Her biggest trade expedition was to the African kingdom of Punt, which brought back many exotic goods. Hatshepsut's monument was built into a cliff above the Nile River. The entrance of this magnificent monument was graced by 200 Sphinx statues. Inside the temple, the walls were decorated with carvings that detailed scenes from Hatshepsut's reign. The pharaoh Ramses II ruled from 1290 to 1224 BCE. This pharaoh wasn't nicknamed Ramses the Great for nothing. He was one of the most important rulers in Egyptian history. Here's Ramses by the numbers. He was made captain in the Egyptian army at age 10.
What?
He ruled for more than 60 years. He had more than 100 wives
What?
and more than 100 children.
What?
He also had hundreds of statues of himself erected all over Egypt.
Holy moly.
His temple complex at Abu Simbel is an excellent example of his impressive building projects. 4 giant statues of himself guard the entrance to the main temple. The inside is just as amazing as the outside. The temple was also built so that twice a year the sun would shine down the hallway to light up the statues. Ramses is also one of the better preserved mummies ever discovered. There have been about 170 pharaohs to rule ancient Egypt. Here are a few notable leaders. Menes is considered the first because he united Upper and Lower Egypt and founded the first dynasty.
Okay.
Cleopatra VII is considered the last. Shortly after her reign, Egypt became a province of the Roman Empire. King Tutankhamun was the youngest. He is possibly the best known pharaoh today because his tomb was nearly intact when discovered. Akhenaten is known for turning ancient Egypt into a monotheistic religion. It returned to polytheistic soon after his death. There are quite a few other pharaohs, but I only have 5 minutes. So that's all for now. Here's some sources.
Very cool. All right. The pharaoh that wouldn't be forgotten. Here we go. Why is this
3,500 years ago in Egypt, a noble pharaoh was the victim of a violent attack. But the attack was not physical. This royal had been dead for 20 years. The attack was historical, an act of damnatio memoriae, the damnation of memory.
Oh, Lord.
Somebody smashed the pharaoh's statues, took a chisel, and attempted to erase the pharaoh's name and image from history. Who was this pharaoh, and what was behind the attack? Here's the key. The pharaoh Hatshepsut was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
In the normal course of things, she should never have been pharaoh. Although it was legal for a woman to be a monarch, it disturbed some essential Egyptian beliefs. Firstly, the pharaoh was known as the living embodiment of the male god Horus. Secondly, disturbance to the tradition of rule by men was a serious challenge to Ma'at, a word for truth expressing a belief in order and justice, vital to the Egyptians. Hatshepsut had perhaps tried to adapt to this belief in the link between order and patriarchy through her titles. She took the name Ma'at Kare and sometimes referred to herself as Hatshepsu, with a masculine word ending. But apparently, these efforts didn't convince everyone, and perhaps someone erased Hatshepsut's image so that the world would forget the disturbance to Ma'at and Egypt could be balanced again. Hatshepsut, moreover, was not the legitimate heir to the throne, but a regent, a kind of stand-in co-monarch. The Egyptian kingship traditionally passed from father to son. It passed from Thutmose I to his son Thutmose II, Hatshepsut's husband. It should have passed from Thutmose II directly to his son Thutmose III, but Thutmose III was a little boy when his father died. Hatshepsut, the dead pharaoh's chief wife and widow, stepped in to help as her stepson's regent, but ended up ruling beside him as a fully fledged pharaoh. Perhaps Thutmose III was angry about this. Perhaps he was the one who erased her images. It's also possible that someone wanted to dishonor Hatshepsut because she was a bad pharaoh. But the evidence suggests she was actually pretty good. She
Mhm.
competently fulfilled the traditional roles of the office. She was a great builder. Her mortuary temple, Djeser Djeseru, was an architectural phenomenon at the time and is still admired today. She enhanced the economy of Egypt, conducting a very successful trade mission to the distant land of Punt. She had strong religious connections. She even claimed to be the daughter of the state god, Amun. And she had a successful military career, with a Nubian campaign and claims she fought alongside her soldiers in battle. Of course, we have to be careful when we assess the success of Hatshepsut's career, since most of the evidence was written by Hatshepsut herself. She tells her own story in pictures and writing on the walls of her mortuary temple and the red chapel she built for Amun. So who committed the crimes against Hatshepsut's memory? The most popular suspect is her stepson, nephew, and co-ruler, Thutmose III. Did he do it out of anger because she stole his throne? This is unlikely, since the damage wasn't done until 20 years after Hatshepsut died. That's a long time to hang on to anger and then act in a rage. Maybe Thutmose III did it to make his own reign look stronger, but it is most likely that he or someone else erased the images so that people would forget that a woman ever sat on Egypt's throne. This gender anomaly was simply too much of a threat to Ma'at and had to be obliterated from history. Happily, the ancient censors were not quite thorough enough. Enough evidence survived for us to piece together what happened, so the story of this unique, powerful woman can now be told.
Oh, I think I deleted something. Dang it. All right, let me go back here. All right, so we did this. Okay, the pyramids. Oh, I think I deleted. Okay, all right, I know where we're at. All right, so let's look at the pyramids, why they started building them and how they started building them. We won't watch this one. I don't think I have this one up, but here's the link. So it's going to start with Khufu. He's going to build the first one, and then his son and grandson, and then we're going to get 47 in total. Of course, these are going to be for tombs, right? For pharaohs, wealthy people, and then it's going to stimulate the economy. All right, but first I want to go here. This is Airpano. I think I've showed you this before. I think that's what I deleted. Okay, let's see. I like these because you could see the. Hold on. Oh, sorry. All right, so that's his. That's the first one, right? Where is it? There's the second one, and there's the third one. So you could, when you go here and you go to this website, you can pretty much type in whatever you want, right? So let's go here. Here's your cards. So it'll take you to different things in the area. So there's the Great Sphinx, right? Very awesome. I would love to go there. Right? You can see the city, right? Cairo is right there. Like if you can hit the helicopter and it'll take you over the city. Okay, so there's the top view. Look at that. It's just amazing, right? You have like modern, I always think it's fascinating because you have like modern stuff and then you have the ancient world side by side, they're existing. Now remember, if you click this button here, it kind of gives you a bit of the stories, right? It tells you it's seven wonders of the world. It also talks about how, I think one of the Transformer movies, right, where they were used here, and you see them in video games and all kinds of stuff, right? You see the drones here while they're filming. So very, very cool. You can go all the way down and read the story. And of course, here's the photo gallery. Now, if I click here and I go to Egypt, I also want to show you Luxor. Here it is. Okay. I thought they had Karnak, but they don't. But here's Luxor. So I don't have the clip there, but like I said, if you type in Egypt or whatever you want, you know, here's Ramses II, right, guarding. You could see, right, you could see all the hieroglyphics etched into the columns. Right. Amazing. If you click on the person, it's telling you. You see like regular, you know, there's some Egyptians, right? They're just kind of hanging out and you see all the statues here. So, I mean, pretty cool. Let's see. Okay, let's go here. Look at this. Wow. I mean, it's just phenomenal. Right. So air panel, most places in the world, you just type it in and you can take it there and go on a tour. So if you click down here, right, it tells you, you know, the story of the person, you know, it's Cairo, taxi drive, whatnot. And then here you can see some cultural stuff, right? They're celebrating Dora, the festival, right? Gods, not, if you will, right? The marketplace inside the temple. So you can see images inside the temple. And of course at dusk, right? Karnak. I mean, this is a very famous temple that's been excavated. There's 33 separate temples and halls. So you can just read all this stuff. It's just fascinating. You see the capital, of course, fisheye view. So I just wanted to show you that, to know that if you're interested in Spain, France, Germany, Iran, Iraq, whatever it is, type it in here. You know, go on a tour, check out the world. Okay, let's see. Wait a minute. Before we get to the gods. Okay, who built the pyramids? Right, here we go.
Time ago, a guy built a tomb out of rock so he could live in it after he died and not be dead. His son was like, hey, that's cool, so we built one too. Then his son was like, me too, so he made a third, and they were all buried there. And that's how we got this, the Pyramids of Giza. How did people who hadn't even invented the wheel build these things? And why? They're so big, they're so precise, they're so directionally oriented, and they're so mysterious. At first glance, they really do look out of this world. Thing is, the pyramids are much older than you probably think. They were already ancient history to people in ancient history, which led to some pretty wild theories about how they came to be. But pyramid technology didn't just show up out of nowhere. It was the end product of centuries of scientific and cultural evolution of people figuring it out. And it definitely wasn't aliens. Early on, Egyptians buried their dead like we do. The desert naturally mummified some corpses, which influenced their religious beliefs. You need to preserve the body to reach the afterlife, and when you get there, you'll need all your stuff. Rich people's graves had nicer stuff, so they needed to protect their afterlife investment. First with simple mounds, and later with mud brick eternal houses. Then a king named Djoser was like, why have one little mud mastaba when I can have 6 stone mastabas in a stack? So he stacked 6 stone mastabas like a mastaba boss, and the age of pyramids had begun. This was literally the first time humans had piled stone this high. Egyptians knew totally vertical walls got less stable as they got taller, so Djoser's architects stacked bricks at an incline and let gravity do the work. Step pyramid achieved. Why pyramids and not other shapes? If you want to make a big pile of blocks, a pyramid gets you the most stability for the least material. A third of the way up, you've already laid 2/3 of your stone. Halfway, you've placed more than 80%. Next comes Snefru, Mr. Pyramid. He built his own step pyramid, but then decided he wanted a smooth one instead. So they started on a second. No one had ever built one of those before, so they made some mistakes. For starters, they built it on sand, which is soft. They laid the blocks carelessly, and it was too steep. So halfway through, they changed the slope and ended up with this. Snefru was like, you're not burying me in that. So he ordered a third pyramid. Only this time, they built a solid foundation, laid the stones in horizontal rows, and precision cut the edges. Snefru's motto, if at first you don't succeed, try again, and then try again one more time. Snefru had experimented his way to a blueprint for building awesome pyramids. The Great Pyramid at Giza, built by his son Khufu, took that blueprint to the next level. Khufu's pyramid remained the tallest structure on Earth for almost 4,000 years, until some church tower in 1311, which fell down, so it was tallest again until this radio antenna was finished in 1889. Khufu's son Khafra built his pyramid right next to Dad's, and he didn't stop innovating. Instead of leveling the entire 46,000 square meter footprint, he built his pyramid over a natural stone mound and only leveled the outer edge, which was less work. Duh. It's 3 meters shorter than his dad's, but this higher ground creates the illusion that Khafra's pyramid is taller. Kids, am I right? But even these seemingly perfect pyramids weren't without mistakes. Khafra's had a slight twist near the top in order to make the edges line up evenly. What's remarkable is Egypt's biggest stone pyramids were the product of just 3 human generations. But those were generations full of trial and error. Pyramid building continued for nearly 700 years. And like any product, efficiency started without over quality. Precision-cut cores were replaced by rough-cut blocks. Kings still wrapped their pyramids in fine white limestone, but over the next 1,000 years, that was removed by stone stealers and rock robbers, leaving the cheaply produced cores to collapse into rubble, which is probably why you've never heard of them. Ironically, the kings were probably disappointed by the whole afterlife thing. But the pyramids themselves have proven to be surprisingly resilient. Ancient isn't a synonym for stupid. The world's first skyscrapers were tombs, and just like our buildings, they didn't spring up out of nowhere. They were the product of centuries of engineering trial and error. Go back 500 years and show someone a smartphone, and they'd probably think you were a wizard. But when we look back from the present at the ideas and failures along the way, we see it's not magic at all. It's science. And if you still think aliens did it, you're in denial. You know, the river. Stay curious. Special thanks to 23andMe for sponsoring this episode. They're a personal...
All right. Back to here. Boom. All right. Now let's get to Egyptian religion. So they're polytheistic. This means they have many gods. Ra is the sun god. He's considered the most important god in Egypt. However, we're going to see that he had several names and there were other gods. It just depends on who was writing it, when they wrote it, and all this stuff. So it's a very complicated mythology or religion. So we'll get to that. Osiris, we're going to watch a video about him, and Set. These are brothers. So let's get to that. And we're going to start at 4:02 and stop at 8:44 because this video, it has the pantheons of ancient Mesopotamia. So we don't have to watch all of it, although the video link's in there, so if you're interested.
Generally, you can read them in many, many ways. No, Tote, that is not a joke about hieroglyphics, but it does get us to our next significantly more complex family of gods, the Egyptian pantheon. Right off the bat, I'm going to say that the Egyptian pantheon is even more confusing than your average confusing pantheon. But surprise, surprise, it's also just as incestuous. First off, there's no standard version of the Egyptian pantheon. The myth changes depending upon who is writing it and where and when. For example, in the story of Isis and Osiris, our most complete source isn't even Egyptian. It's the Greek biographer Plutarch, who wrote in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, well after Egypt had become Hellenized and then Romanized. In his version of the Isis and Osiris myths, he gives Egyptian gods Greek names. For example, he refers to Tot as Hermes. He does still give you credit for inventing darts, though. So there are also different versions of the pantheon depending upon where you are in Egypt. For the most part, we'll be sticking with the group of gods worshipped at the city of Heliopolis and headed by Atum or Ra. But we'll give a nod to the fact that in Thebes, the pantheon was led by Amun. And we can't forget the attempted monotheism of Akhenaten. That was classic. And just to make this even trickier, a lot of the Egyptian sources we have for myths are fragmentary, and they're spread out over thousands of years. So for simplicity, we're going to settle on the 9-god pantheon that forms the core of Egyptian religious belief. And it doesn't include Tot. Sorry, pal. The Ennead, or 9 gods, was in place in Heliopolis by 2700 BCE and is the one found in the pyramid texts, which might be the oldest surviving set of religious texts in the world. At the top of this pantheon is Atum, aka Re, aka Ra, aka Khepri, aka Amun, or sometimes Amun-Ra, depending upon where in Egypt you are. This is why we're trying to simplify things. Atum is the great eye of the heavens and of creation. He was the spitter in our Egyptian creation story. Atum's creative Kaf creates Shu, the life spirit, and Tefnut, the the world order or cosmos. This brother and sister pair mate and give birth to Geb and Nut. Geb is the spirit of life, and Nut is an Egyptian great mother goddess. The two are separated by their father, Shu, and Geb becomes earth, while Nut becomes the sky and the stars, which is a neat reversal of the whole earth mother, sky father thing. Like their parents, brother and sister Geb and Nut become the mother and father of the rest of the gods in this pantheon. Their children, Osiris and Isis, are probably the best known Egyptian gods, other than hawk-headed Ra. Osiris, god of the underworld and grain, kind of like a Demeter/Hades combo, was probably the most popular of the Egyptian gods. Because, I mean, hey, who doesn't like food and death? He dies and is revived, which happens more than you would expect in myth. Actually, maybe exactly as much as you would expect in myth. Isis is a goddess of the earth and the moon and is married to Osiris. The mystery cult of Isis was popular well beyond Egypt, into Roman time. And if you're not sure what a mystery cult is, guess what? That's the point. The second son and third child from the Geb-Nut pairing is Set. Set is a god of evil and darkness and is the nemesis of Isis and Osiris. He's married to his sister Nephthys, a goddess of death and dusk. Because, if you're going to be married for all of eternity, it's nice to share interests. And the final piece of this puzzle is young Horus, not to be confused with old Horus, or the guy from Warhammer. He was conceived miraculously by Isis and Osiris after the latter's death, and he has aspects of a sun god. He's a light that defeats Set's darkness. Most important though, Horus, who is often depicted with the head of a falcon, not a hawk, not an ibis, is the spiritual force behind the pharaohs. I know that you're wondering when we're going to talk about Anubis, Bastet, and Sekhmet, but remember, for the sake of comparative simplicity, we're sticking by this 9-god pantheon. So what conclusions then can we draw from this basic pantheon? There are multiple versions of sun gods, with Ra representing both the sun and creation, and Horus representing both the sun and kingship. So we can infer that the sun was important to the Egyptians, probably as much for its eternal cycle of death and rebirth as for its providing life-giving energy. Ancient Egyptian culture is commonly said to focus on death, and that's not wrong, although death to the Egyptians probably didn't hold the same terror that it does for many in the modern world. I think the most distinct example of this necrocentric ideal is the pyramids, and the mummified corpses and jars full of organs found within them, but also this week's feature.
Okay, so there's that. Boom, 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 boom. All right, so let's look at the Egyptian myth of Isis. Okay, it says Isis is infinitely adaptable, like a web of energy. She can embrace and encompass all. Isis is very important. She is really important to Rome, and the Romans really kind of take her myth and, like you said, make it. It becomes kind of a cult.
A woman in rags emerged from the swamp, flanked by 7 giant scorpions. Carrying a baby, she headed for the nearest village to beg for food. She approached a magnificent mansion, but the mistress of the house took one look at her grimy clothes and unusual companions and slammed the door in her face. So she continued down the road until she came to a cottage. The woman there took pity on the stranger and offered her what she could, a simple meal and a bed of straw. Her guest was no ordinary beggar. She was Isis, the most powerful goddess in Egypt. Isis was in hiding from her brother Set, who murdered her husband and wanted to murder her infant son, Horus. Set was also a powerful god, and he was looking for them. So to keep her cover, Isis had to be very discreet. She couldn't risk using her powers, but she was not without aid. Serket, goddess of venomous creatures, had sent 7 of her fiercest servants to guard Isis and her son. As Isis and Horus settled into their humble accommodation, the scorpions fumed at how the wealthy woman had offended their divine mistress. They all combined their venom and gave it to one of the 7, Tefen. In the dead of the night, Tefen crept over to the mansion. As he crawled under the door, he saw the owner's young son sleeping peacefully and gave him a mighty sting. Isis and her hostess were soon awakened by loud wailing. As they peered out of the doorway of the cottage, they saw a mother running through the street, weeping as she cradled her son. When Isis recognized the woman who had turned her away, she understood what her scorpions had done. Isis took the boy in her arms and began to recite a powerful spell. O poison of Tefen, come out of him and fall upon the ground. Poison of Bethen, advance not, penetrate no farther, come out of him and fall upon the ground. For I am Isis, the great enchantress, the speaker of spells. Fall down, O poison of Mestet. Hasten not, poison of Mestetet. Rise not, poison of Petet and Titet. Approach not, poison of Martet. With each name she invoked, that scorpion's poison was neutralized. The child stirred, and his mother wept with gratitude and lamented her earlier callousness, offering all her wealth to Isis in repentance. The woman who had taken Isis in watched in awe. She had had no idea who she'd brought under her roof. And from that day on, the people learned to make a poultice to treat scorpion bites, speaking magical incantations just as the goddess had.
Very
Disguise
cool.
plays a significant role in many ancient myths. Why is everyone being so sneaky?
All right, so let's talk about her brother and husband. Okay, this is Osiris. How frightened gods are of pain. There is nothing more foreign to them, and so nothing they ache more deeply to see. Whoa. Okay, here we go.
It was a feast like Egypt had never seen before. The warrior god Set and his wife, the goddess Nephthys, decorated an extravagant hall for the occasion with a beautiful wooden chest as the centerpiece. They invited all the most important gods, dozens of lesser deities, and foreign monarchs. But no one caused as big a stir as Set and Nephthys' older brother Osiris, the god who ruled all of Egypt and had brought prosperity to everyone. Set announced a game. Whoever could fit perfectly in the chest could have it as a gift. One by one, the guests clambered in, but no one fit. Finally, it was Osiris's turn. As he lay down, everyone could see it was a perfect fit. Another win for the god who could do no wrong. Then, Set slammed the lid down, with Osiris still inside, sealed it shut, and tossed it into the Nile. The chest was a coffin. Set had constructed it specifically to trap his brother and planned the party to lure him into it. Set had long been jealous of his brother's successful reign and hoped to replace him as the ruler of all Egypt. The Nile bore the coffin out to sea, and it drifted for many days before washing ashore near Byblos, where a great cedar grew around it. The essence of the god within gave the tree a divine aura, and when the king of Byblos noticed it, he ordered the tree cut down and brought to his palace. Unbeknownst to him, the coffin containing Egypt's most powerful god was still inside. Set's victory seemed complete, but he hadn't counted on his sisters. Set's wife Nephthys was also his sister, while their other sister, the
This was
goddess
very
Isis,
common.
was married to their brother Osiris. Isis was determined to find Osiris and enlisted Nephthys' help behind Set's back. The two sisters took the shape of falcons and traveled far and wide. Some children who had seen the coffin float by pointed them to the palace of Byblos. Isis adopted a new disguise and approached the palace. The queen was so charmed by the disguised goddess that she entrusted her with nursing the baby prince. Isis decided to make the child immortal by bathing him in flame. When the horrified queen came upon this scene,
Could you
Isis
imagine?
revealed herself and demanded the tree. When she cut the coffin from the trunk and opened it, Osiris was dead inside.
Oh, no.
Weeping, she carried his body back to Egypt and hid it in a swamp, while she set off in search of a means of resurrecting him. But while she was gone, Set found the body and cut it into many pieces, scattering them
I think it's
throughout
13
Egypt.
pieces he cut it in.
Isis had lost Osiris for the second time, but she did not give up. She searched all over the land, traveling in a boat of papyrus. One by one, she tracked down the parts of her husband's dismembered body in every province of Egypt, holding a funeral for each piece. At long last, she had recovered every piece but one, his penis, which a fish in the Nile had eaten.
Say what?
Working with what she had, Isis reconstructed and revived her husband. But without his penis, Osiris was incomplete. He could not remain among the living, could not return to his old position as ruler of Egypt. Instead, he would have to rule over Duat, the realm of the dead. Before he went, though, he and Isis conceived a son to bear Osiris's legacy and one day avenge him. Keep exploring ancient Egypt with our guide to the Egyptian
Okay.
underworld, or follow along with
All right, we're almost done. All right, we did that. Okay, the final judgment. Now, we watched the video on Osiris. He gets chopped up. Finally, his wife Isis wife / sister. In a lot of the depictions, he's depicted in white, and that is because he is considered the first mummy. Okay, when she puts the 13 body pieces back together, she wraps him in this linen, kind of mummifying him. She kind of goes through that process. So he's considered the first mummy, and he's also, in charge of Duat, the underworld. Okay. We're going to watch a video about the Book of the Dead. You're going to see Anubis. You're going to see that they're going to weigh the individual's heart against the feather. And of course, if your heart is heavier, then Amet, this creature here, is going to eat you and consume you. And we have Horus here, and then this is Osiris, and this is his sister / wife, Isis. Okay, so here we go.
Ani stands before a large golden scale, where the jackal-headed god Anubis is weighing his heart against a pure ostrich feather. Ani was a real person, a scribe from the Egyptian city of Thebes who lived in the 13th century BCE. And depicted here is a scene from his Book of the Dead, a 78-foot papyrus scroll designed to help him attain immortality. Such funerary texts were originally written only for pharaohs, but with time, the Egyptians came to believe regular people could also reach the afterlife, if they succeeded in the passage. Ani's epic journey begins with his death. His body is mummified by a team of priests who remove every organ except the heart, the seat of emotion, memory, and intelligence. It's then stuffed with a salt called natron and wrapped in resin-soaked linen. In addition, the wrappings are woven with charms for protection and topped with a heart scarab amulet that will prove important later on. The goal of the 2-month process is to preserve Ani's body as an ideal form with which his spirit can eventually reunite. But first, that spirit must pass through the Duat, or underworld. This is a realm of vast caverns, lakes of fire, and magical gates, all guarded by fearsome beasts. Snakes, crocodiles, and half-human monstrosities with names like He Who Dances in Blood. To make things worse, Apep, the serpent god of destruction, lurks in the shadows, waiting to swallow Ani's soul. Fortunately, Ani is prepared with the magic contained within his Book of the Dead. Like other Egyptians who could afford it, Ani customized his scroll to include the particular spells, prayers, and codes he thought his spirit might need. Equipped with this arsenal, our hero traverses the obstacles, repels the monster's attacks, and stealthily avoids Apep to reach the hall of Ma'at, goddess of truth and justice. Here, Ani faces his final challenge. He is judged by 42 assessor gods, who must be convinced that he has lived a righteous life. Ani approaches each one, addressing them by name and declaring a sin he has not committed. Among these negative confessions, or declarations of innocence, he proclaims that he has not made anyone cry, is not an eavesdropper, and has not polluted the water. But did Ani really live such a perfect life? Not quite, but that's where the heart scarab amulet comes in. It's inscribed with the words, "Do not stand as a witness against me," precisely so Ani's heart doesn't betray him by recalling the time he listened to his neighbor's fight or washed his feet in the Nile. Now it's Ani's moment of truth, the weighing of the heart. If his heart is heavier than the feather, weighed down by Ani's wrongdoings, it'll be devoured by the monstrous Amit, part crocodile, part leopard, part hippopotamus, and Ani will cease to exist
No, thank you.
forever. But Ani is in luck. His heart is judged pure. Ra, the sun god, takes him to Osiris, god of the underworld, who gives him final approval to enter the afterlife. In the endless and lush field of reeds, Ani meets his deceased parents. Here there is no sadness, pain, or anger, but there is work to be done. Like everyone else, Ani must cultivate a plot of land, which he does with the help of a Shabti doll that had been placed in his tomb. Today, the papyrus of Ani resides in the British Museum, where it has been since 1888. Only Ani, if anyone, knows what really happened after his death. But thanks to his Book of the Dead, we can imagine him happily tending his crops for all eternity.
Right, very cool. All right. Yeah, these are the assessor gods, right, that they mentioned in the video. So one by one, he has to go through them. All right. So let's watch this last little cartoon. This is all I have. I think what I'm going to do for the assignment, I think I'm going to have you select 3 or 4 of the video clips and, I don't know, answer some sort of questions. I haven't created the document yet, so I'll let you all know. All right, guys. guys. So that's ancient Egypt. Next time we're going to be talking about mummification. So see you later.